Welcome back to the Fork in the Road Fearcast. I'm Lauren Duenas, and I'm here with my sexy husband.
Starting strong tonight, aren't we?
hmm And his name is Eric Duenas, who's also my co host, my research assistant, and the person who's literally been walking around the house for the past week saying, "Did you know the steel was brittle?"
Because it was, Lauren. It was historically brittle.
I know you've only told me 100 times. Well, tonight is a big one. This is not a casual fun facts episode. It's not a side quest. This is a full deep dive into the conspiracies surrounding the sinking of the Titanic. And more importantly, why those conspiracies even exist centuries later.
This is Lauren's topic. She's really, really into the Titanic and the conspiracy surrounding it.
Yeah, so I love conspiracies, but I truly love learning about the Titanic. I love the movie. I remember when it came out when I was in fifth grade, and my friends and I would have kind of like a contest of like who went and saw the movie more times in theaters. I think I was up to like 3 times, but truly, truly such an awesome movie.
Question: if you were on the door and I was in the water, would you let me on?
Of course, you know I would.
So then you think Rose had room on the door for Jack.
Sadly, yes, I do.
Last question: are you going to paint me like one of your French girls?
No, I will not. Sorry. That one's a no.
All right. We're not doing internet nonsense tonight. No TikTok myths, no cursed TikTok soundtracks, and no trust me, bro theories.
Nope. Everything we're talking about tonight comes from actual survivor testimonies, official inquiries, engineering reports, and modern forensic analysts. If this sounds wild, it's because the real history already is. So let's go to April 15th, 1912. The North Atlantic is calm. No waves, no wind, no moon. At 11:40 p.m., the largest ship ever built strikes an iceberg. At 2:20 a.m., it's gone. More than 1,500 people die.
And within hours, the story is already being simplified.
Yep, it's simply just an iceberg hits a ship and the ship sinks. It's clean, it's easy, and it's oddly comforting.
But when you actually read the testimony, nothing about this is clean.
Yeah, there's definitely problems with the official story. Before we touch on conspiracies, we have to talk about something uncomfortable. Titanic was not operating under normal conditions.
And this is where people get defensive because admitting that doesn't mean the crew was evil, but it does mean mistakes were made long before the iceberg.
hmm
So, the first thing we have to talk about right off the bat is the coal fire. Coal bunker fires weren't unheard of on steamships, but Titanic's fire was severe. It started weeks before the voyage in Belfast, inside Bunker 6, which sat directly against the hull. Coal fires can burn internally for weeks and reach temperatures over 1800 degrees Fahrenheit. At that temperature, steel loses tensile strength, microscopic cracks form, and once cooled rapidly, like in freezing seawater, it becomes brittle.
Brittle. So when people say the fire didn't sink the ship, I think they're missing the point.
Right, the fire didn't sink Titanic, but it lowered the margin of survival.
Mhm.
Fireman Frederick Barrick later testified that the bulkhead was so hot, it was too hot to touch. Modern analysis of pre departure photos shows a heat distortion mark on the hull, right where the iceberg later struck, which is
Mm,
crazy.
Yeah, it truly is. And the sadder part in this is that the passengers were never even told about it.
In fact, it was explicit that the passengers were not to be told about it.
Crazy. So, why did it sail anyway? That's the obvious question. If there was a serious fire, why didn't they just delay the voyage?
Because White Star Line was in trouble. Titanic's sister ship, Olympic, had collided with a British warship months earlier. The court ruled Olympic at fault, so insurance didn't pay, and the repairs were astronomical. White Star needed Titanic to sail on time, flawlessly, and with good press, which just so happens to be the opposite of what they got after all of
Mm,
this.
yeah. Canceling or delaying the maiden voyage would have meant refunds, international scrutiny, and investor panic.
So they did what any good businessman would do, they gambled.
Hmm. So the coal fire cover up, this is kind of where we cross the line from bad judgment into active concealment. At both the British and American inquiries, the fire was minimized, it was downplayed, and it was ignored entirely.
And of course, that's not accidental. Admitting the fire meant admitting the ship sailed compromised, opening the door to criminal liability, and destroying the unsinkable narrative.
Hmm. This is the first reason conspiracies explode because people sense they weren't getting the full truth. There's a theory the Olympic was switched with the Titanic. So, this is pretty much the most famous Titanic conspiracy. The claim is that the Titanic didn't sink, that her damaged sister ship, the Olympic, did.
And people don't believe this because they're dumb. They believe it because the motive makes absolute sense.
Hmm.
The Olympic had been badly damaged, couldn't collect insurance money, and was draining the company financially. And Titanic and Olympic were nearly identical.
Yeah, some shipyard workers later claimed the serial numbers didn't line up. Some survivors said even the layouts felt very off.
But the physical evidence matters. Hull plates recovered from the wreck carry Titanic's build number. So that's the biggest problem with this theory, that they swapped the ships.
Hmm. Yeah, there's one that's similar. It's about like the partial switch and cutting cost type of thing. So this is where it kind of evolves into something that's like perhaps a little bit more believable.
Yeah, because instead of swapping ships, White Star likely cut corners everywhere to recover from Olympic's losses. Modern metallurgists found iron rivets where steel should have been, high slag content, and brittle fracture patterns.
So the Titanic wasn't swapped; she was just compromised.
And that lines up perfectly with what the wreck actually shows.
Eric, you're an insurance attorney. I know you have some big feelings about this.
Well, as an insurance attorney, I strongly advise against doing shit like this.
Yeah,
I don't know. I honestly don't know how people didn't do time for this,
right.
because switching ships, compromising ships, switching parts from the ships, I mean, it's textbook fraud. So I don't suggest ever doing anything like this, because it's gonna land you in jail.
Yeah, definitely a lot of fraud there. That's for sure. So before the iceberg ever appeared, Titanic already had the hidden fire. They had financial pressure. They had rushed construction, and corners were cut for profit.
Which means the question stops being, how did an iceberg sink the Titanic?
And becomes,
Why was the ship so vulnerable in the first place?
hmm So, why was the Titanic going too fast? We're going to talk about speed because this is where the Titanic story starts to feel a little less like an accident and more like a gamble. The official line has always been Titanic wasn't trying to break any records.
Which is technically true, but it's also very misleading, because while White Star publicly said they cared about luxury, internally they still cared about prestige, and prestige meant arriving early.
Exactly. Uh, Cunard had the Lithuania and the Muratina, which were both speed monsters. White Star couldn't compete ship to ship, so they needed headlines.
And of course, the easiest headline in 1912 was fastest maiden voyage.
Hmm.
Multiple first class passengers later testified that officers were openly talking about speed at dinner. One of the passengers recalled an officer saying, "We'll be ahead of schedule if we keep up like this."
Hmm. And here's the part that always gets me. Titanic received warnings about ice all day long. It wasn't just one warning, it wasn't just two warnings, it was over half a dozen, which is just mind blowing.
And of course, instead of slowing down, they maintained 22 knots near full cruising speed at night in an ice field in calm water, which is the single worst visibility condition for spotting ice. So although
Right.
they weren't trying to break records, they were still trying to get there fast.
Mhm. Right, I mean, they even said that in the movie too. I mean, I know some of it's fictional, but, like, that's a known fact that they were trying to break records. So, no waves breaking against the iceberg, no white foam, just a dark shape against black water. Slowing down would have meant admitting risk.
And White Star wasn't about to do that on day one because they wanted to get there fast. And two, they advertised the ship as being unsinkable.
Mhm. Now there's the wireless room. So, this makes people angry when they learn about it, and you know what? They should be.
Mhm.
Titanic's wireless room wasn't just there for emergencies, it was a business.
This is important, very important. The wireless operators weren't even Titanic crew. They worked for the Marconi company. And, of course, they were paid per message sent.
hmm So that night, you had two competing priorities, as you can see. One was the ice warnings, and the other one was rich passengers sending personal messages back to land. So you can guess which one paid better, of course.
Oh, I know which one paid better, for sure. At least 7 iceberg warnings came in that day. Some were delivered, some were delayed, some never even reached the bridge. The most infamous came from the SS Californian warning Titanic that they were surrounded by ice. Titanic senior operator Jack Phillips replied to this warning, shut up, I'm working Cape Race." That message never reached Captain Smith.
Yep. And after the sinking, this is where it starts to smell fishy.
Yeah, the Marconi Corporation moved fast. Operators were publicly praised, financially rewarded, and quietly shielded from intense questioning. Marconi had a lot to lose if their brand new technology was blamed for a maritime disaster.
So this wasn't sabotage, but it was a system that prioritized profit over safety.
And that's how conspiracies are born.
Yep. So let's talk about missing binoculars because this sounds so minor until you really understand it and think about it.
Oh, yeah. Titanic's crow's nest was more than 90 feet above the water. At that height, the naked eye struggles, especially on a calm, moonless night. So, binoculars really mattered here.
hmm And the lookouts didn't have them because Officer David Blair was reassigned just hours before sailing. So what happened was he accidentally took them. Well, he took the key to the binocular locker with him, and no one ever retrieved them, and no backup was ever issued at all.
So basically, while the ship was about to crash into an iceberg, the binoculars were locked in a locker.
hmm
Frederick Fleet, the lookout who spotted the iceberg, later testified, "If we had binoculars, we might have seen it sooner. Thank you, Captain Obvious." At Titanic speed, 20 to 30 seconds could have meant a clean miss.
Yep, and that's where people argue. Was it catastrophic incompetence? Was it just terrible luck? Or was it something that maybe was a little bit more intentional?
We don't have evidence of sabotage, but we do have evidence that no one fixed a very obvious safety failure.
hmm
I mean, we went on a cruise. How safe did you feel on the cruise, the Disney cruise?
Yeah, well, like you said, it was a Disney cruise. So very safe, obviously safe enough to bring our children. And, I feel like a Disney cruise these days is probably equivalent to what the Titanic was back then. It was advertised as like the unsinkable. It was all, upper class and the headlines were just, that it was the best ship ever. And so I imagine that they all felt very safe on that ship, just as we would have boarding the Disney ships.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think the people on the Disney ship had access to binoculars?
I would sure hope so and assume so, otherwise I would not be boarding it.
W- Do you think the Disney ship had an ongoing coal fire in its bunker that was right next to their
Absolutely.
hole?
Absolutely not. That'd
Of
be quite
course not.
terrifying.
I mean, nowadays, cruises learned a lot from this. I mean, it's the only mode of transportation where you actively have to participate in a safety drill. Do you remember how they made us go to all of our little areas to where we had to meet in case there was a disaster to
Right.
get on the lifeboat?
Yeah, I remember. Yep. Almost like a little fire drill type of thing.
I did feel very safe on that cruise, but after going through all of this stuff, I'm starting to realize how much actually goes into giving you that feeling of safety,
Yeah.
which is wild.
I mean, you're out in the ocean, in the open ocean. How safe can you really be?
I mean, I imagine on that boat we were actually pretty safe.
No, I tend to agree. Otherwise I wouldn't have gotten onto it. All right, so there's the steering error too, which is another conspiracy. So we're getting into the moment itself when the iceberg was finally spotted. First Officer Murdoch ordered hard a starboard.
And this is where history gets weird because in 1912, ships were transitioning from old tiller commands to modern helm commands. Under the old system, turn the tiller right and the ship's bow goes left. Under the new system, you turn to wheel right and the ship's bow goes right. Some historians believe the helmsman hesitated or may have actually turned the wrong way.
Which it doesn't sound like much unless you realize that they literally only had seconds.
Exactly. A descendant of Officer Murdoch later claimed family letters described confusion on the bridge. So even a 5-second delay at 22 knots could mean the difference between clearing the iceberg and clipping it.
Yeah, I agree. And this theory is so controversial. Like, it is, but it explains something that's really important, why the Titanic didn't miss the iceberg entirely.
I mean, if you steer the wrong way at first, you're going to hit it.
Right. I mean, it makes sense. So here's another theory, and it pretty much ties everything together. Some survivors reported odd sensations before the iceberg, like vibrations, a slight list, water appearing where it shouldn't have.
Firemen working near Bunker 6 testified that they noticed water earlier than expected, which points right back to the coal fire. The hull was already weakened, already under stress. That means the iceberg wasn't the beginning, it was the final blow.
Right. And White Star had every reason to deny that. Admitting pre existing damage would have destroyed them legally, obviously.
Of course.
So by the time Titanic ever saw the iceberg, they already had a weakened hull. They ignored warnings. They were making profit driven decisions. They were missing safety equipment and the seconds lost to confusion.
Which makes the iceberg feel less like fate and more like inevitability, like Thanos.
Exactly. Like Thanos. You had to throw that in there, right, Eric?
I
Just
did.
can't help yourself. But by the time the iceberg hit, the Titanic was already compromised.
We can argue about steel and speed all day, but none of that explains the most disturbing part of this story.
Yeah, this is truly insane because the Titanic was not alone that night.
That's right. There was another ship close enough to see her lights.
And guess what? That ship did absolutely nothing.
Next episode, we talk about the ship that watched Titanic sink.
Yep. So if you liked what you heard tonight, like and subscribe and tune in for part two.